Uh, Thank you all very much for coming this afternoon to the E2 Tech Council's webinar on sustainability and planning. For today's program, we've got two speakers, Jeff Marks from Climate Work Maine and Sarah Mills-Knapp from the Greater Portland Council of Government. And the program will last about an hour. It's a big topic, the various storms in the winter, and other events happening along the coast as well as inland in Maine have brought these topics to the forefront of many communities across the state. Because of that, the program will be recorded. All the participants today are muted, and so if you have questions, you can put them in the chat box. Later on in the program, we will be opening it up for people to speak. But for now, I have the great pleasure of passing the baton over to Jeff Marks in a moment. In terms of the E2 Tech Council, we've been around for 22 years. We're the largest community of environmental and energy professionals in the state. We convene gatherings like this. We're a catalyst for growth. We are a resource for institutions, and we help individuals in Maine and further afield connect to share knowledge and experience. We've got about 20 board members who are elected for 3-year terms. You see all of their names here and their affiliations. And as you can see on the right-hand side, Jeff Marks, our speaker here today from Climate Works Maine, actually serves on our board of directors. And so he'll be spending time with me tomorrow. We have our spring board retreat for 5 hours tomorrow afternoon. Lots of things for the board to discuss and lots of things for the membership to learn about. So thank you so much. And Jeff, it's all yours.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. My name's Jeff Marks. I'm with Climate Work Maine, as Eric mentioned. Been a long-term supporter of E2 Tech. Great programs. So glad that Eric is in the position. It's had a good string of executive directors over the years, and Jackie is playing a key role as well. So thank you both for inviting me to participate this afternoon. So I've been working with businesses for 25 years or more, mostly on policy and government relations side of things, but also in other capacities as well, and working mostly on energy, environmental, and sustainability issues. So I'm going to give a very high-level overview today of some of the climate and sustainability planning that we do on the business level on a variety of different topics. But let me start by telling you a little bit about who Climate Work Maine is, because we are a new organization. We're a network of business leaders, and we are taking action on climate change to meet its challenges, and we're all familiar with the challenges. Eric opened up this session talking about the recent storms in Maine, and I think it's one of those issues that everybody needs to be involved in some way. But with that said, there are opportunities, and I'll talk a little bit about that later when I bring up some slides on what's going on the federal and state level. We have two really primary purposes. For those companies that are already doing something on climate, we want to be able to promote their products, their services, their projects, what they're doing within their operations, and really get the word out about what companies are now doing on climate and sustainability issues. But almost even more than that, and that's the second bullet here, you know, a lot of businesses, Maine is a small business state, so companies here are focused on, you know, payroll and healthcare and just selling the products and services that they have. So they might not be able to do as much on climate and sustainability, and they may not even be thinking about it. So we want to be able to support them and connect them to the resources that they need to grow, succeed, and make money along the way. So like I said, I'm going to talk very high level on climate and sustainability planning from a business standpoint. And I'm going to cover these three specific topics. I'm going to talk about what's going on the federal level, because there's a lot going on, and many of you probably know some of this, but I want to briefly touch on planning that starts at the federal level. Of course, I could not do any webinar on climate without mentioning the state climate action plan that we have in place here in Maine, because it's truly special and really a model for other states around the country. And then I'm going to talk about business climate and sustainability planning, and basically two programs that we're hoping to launch and implement in the coming months. But starting with this federal climate planning, I mentioned the opportunities earlier, and there are really three laws that have come to pass over the last few years that helps jumpstart business activity on climate and sustainability. One is the American Rescue Plan and Jobs and Recovery Plan. These are the state and federal names for quite a bit of funding that's coming into the state to help businesses, citizens, and others as they prepare for this carbon-constrained future. The governor's energy office has set a goal of doubling clean energy jobs in Maine by 2030. So this is a jobs plan with some teeth to it, and there's quite a bit going on that's coming down to the state level. We also had an infrastructure law that was passed to help rebuild in transportation, drinking water systems, and a focus on broadband and climate change as well. And that presents new opportunities coming into the state. And finally, the Inflation Reduction Law had a $370 billion that are coming into states, going to homeowners, to businesses, to communities for climate-related projects. And the overall goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% and create and sustain jobs across the country in different sectors. I was in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. I was working on cap and trade program legislation, and that whole effort just kind of died for a decade or more. So this Inflation Reduction Law is really the biggest climate change law that's ever been passed by the U.S. Congress. So flowing into the state activity that is going on, I'm sure many of you have read Maine Won't Wait, the state's plan for climate action. And it's a good time to go back and review that plan, because the state is now in the process of updating that plan, hence the 4-year plan that's listed here. And it will be revisiting many of these issues that you see on this slide. How do we develop clean transportation options here in the state? Transportation emissions is really the biggest piece of the greenhouse gas emissions pie in the state. How do we modernize main buildings and incorporate heat pumps and renewable energy and energy efficiency improvements into both homes, buildings, as well as industrial facilities? How do we grow, as I mentioned before, clean energy jobs in the state and make sure that those are sustainable and lasting opportunities for Maine workers? What do we do within our natural resources and, in our traditional farming, agriculture, marine fisheries, and other kind of legacy industries that we have in the state? So these are the 8 climate action strategies presented by the Maine program. And we as an organization support this plan. And when we talk to companies that join Climate Work Maine, we have a very upfront requirement that companies support the Maine State Climate Action Plan in some form. They don't have to support every single strategy and every single tactic that's in the plan, but we would hope that there's general support for the State Climate Action Plan, because a lot of work went into creating that. There's a lot of ongoing work right now to update it. And there are countless businesses and government officials and citizens and NGOs that are working to update that plan so that we're not just improving the environment, we're also improving the economy in the state as well. So now coming to the business climate and sustainability planning. And when you used to ask a lot of businesses 10, 20 years ago about their climate planning, they were really like, well, this really isn't any of our business. We're focused on the bottom line, our shareholders, our customers. We don't have time to think about climate. We don't have time to think about sustainability. That's changed quite a bit. And when we developed Climate Work Maine a couple of years ago, we threw on our tagline, and you can see that in the logo at the bottom left of this slide. It's really everyone's business now. And this is just a small list of the types of companies that are doing something on climate right now. They have planning and process for their own operations, as well as their customers, their clients, and their other stakeholders. So it's really one of those issues that has tentacles that flow into every sector of the economy, as you see represented on this slide. What's driving all this action? This is just a list that I put together of things that are going on in the world, in the country, in the state, that are driving more businesses to develop climate action plans and sustainability plans. Of course, the international global activities that are coming through the recent COP meetings, the economic stimulus that I mentioned before in those 3 federal bills that have been passed over the last few years. There's increasing regulatory action to reduce emissions in various ways. Back in 2001, I was working with a group on limiting greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. And that was never passed, but there have been several plans along the way to help kind of take a sector-specific approach to climate, as well as an economy-wide one. There are more innovative technologies coming online now. The focus on clean transportation, electric vehicles, and infrastructure. Solar and wind and batteries are increasing the overall percentage of renewable sources that are out there, and even overtaking some of the conventional technologies and fuels that we have become accustomed to over the years. And even conservative business organizations. I spent 4 years with the National Association of Manufacturers. Quite honestly, we fought just about every climate regulatory or legislative issue that came up, but a lot of these organizations and their member companies kind of get it now. So we've come a long way. These are some of the things that are driving action. So if we put together a plan, both for the business community as a whole and for individual businesses, we want to have several objectives for the plan. One is to, of course, connect companies to the resources that they need to grow and succeed and reduce their carbon and environmental footprint. E2Tech's a great example of an organization that's set up just to do that. Networking, connections, it's so important to connect companies to people and experts and information technical resources and let them know what's going on in the legislative and regulatory area. So we should be happy that there's an organization like E2 Tech in the state that can help us do that. As I mentioned before, we want to promote technologies and strategies that get us to where we need to go. We want to collaborate with others on some of the big issues that are going on, like transmission. How do we get clean energy from point A to point B? How do we build a supply chain in the offshore wind industry? There's a lot of big topics that are in play right now, and we want to make sure that as many companies, as many individuals are involved as possible. And we want to kind of strengthen the brand of Maine as a clean tech, a clean energy, and a sustainable state so that we can, build the jobs here that we need to meet the goals that we've set for ourselves, but also be able to export the skills and expertise that come from our people into other states and into other countries as well. So I'll briefly go over this. We are launching, hopefully over the next 6 to 12 months, a new kind of statewide business support system for all types, sizes, geographic locations of companies. And we want to be able to engage as many businesses as we can, strengthen partnerships with organizations that are already working on climate issues in the state and support, companies and the projects and solutions that they're working on. So there'll be more information on this coming up, but we'll have a series of, business engagement events around the state, team up with local chambers of commerce to bring in companies in different regions, different counties throughout the state, have some type of mentoring program so that there are experts available to different companies, create resource libraries and toolkits of specific information, work on workforce development, supply chain development, economic development issues. And we'll be doing this, like I said, with some of our current partners, which include E2 Tech and some of the folks who are on this call today. And then getting down even a little bit deeper, planning on the individual business level. And that means a company wants to incorporate climate and sustainability programs and improvements into their company. Who do they go to? What can they access? What type of information is out there to help reduce their air emissions, their greenhouse gas emissions, their waste, their water use? And we're hoping to get a council or group of companies together, share best practices among those companies, educate companies on what's available and what can be easily brought into their own business to make them both profitable and sustainable, and really be a central place to assemble information and experts that we can bring to our small business population in the state. This is just a slide that we took from a sustainability planning webinar that my organization did at the end of last year, but it just gives kind of an overview of those specific tasks that each company needs to take to do sustainability and climate planning within their own company. Happy to talk about this. If you look on the E2 Tech website, you'll see years and years of events that the organization has had, and there's been a lot of talk about sustainability planning, so that's a good resource. And I'm happy to connect folks on this call to any experts or sources of information that can help you make sustainability decisions within your own company. I'll wrap up now, but I just wanted to mention that we're Climate Work Maine is having our second summit on Maine's economy and climate change on May 9th of this year. E2 Tech is one of our partners. GP Cog, who you'll hear from Sarah in just a few minutes, they're one of our partners. And we're going to be talking about some of the big issues like clean energy transmission, generation, how we can build the workforce for a carbon constrained future. What do we do about climate migration? The state of Maine is going to be probably a destination for people from out of state and out of country who are looking to get away from storms and heat waves and other things. How do we prepare the business community and municipalities for that type of migration? So, and we're also going to talk about kind of what are those pragmatic issues that companies can take today to start being more sustainable within their own companies. So I will wrap it up there. That's my contact information if you want to dig deeper into any of these topics. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Jeff. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. Okay, you all seeing the slideshow? Okay. So hello, everybody. I am Sarah Mills-Knapp. I'm the Director of Sustainability at the Greater Portland Council of Governments. And I'm here today to talk a little bit, to kind of bring it closer to the kind of local activity that's happening here in Portland. And Jeff did a really good job sort of setting the federal and state framework through which we're kind of operating right now and the ways in which that is supportive of local action. And I'm going to dive in a little bit more to what's happening with our municipalities. So if you don't know, the Greater Portland Council of Governments is a regional membership organization, and we provide planning and other types of technical services to 30 cities and towns in our Cumberland County region here. And we work in transportation and broadband and economic development and land use and sustainability. We also bring in a lot of federal dollars and distribute them in the region. So that's kind of our role. We provide, through the sustainability team, we provide a lot of technical assistance to our municipal members. So obviously, just to set the stage, you know, our municipalities are really on the front lines, so to speak, of the climate crisis. Actually, here's a picture of the Portland Pier, which floods frequently. So, you know, we're seeing, our members are seeing a lot of impacts to infrastructure, the ecosystems, their economies, and obviously to the more vulnerable populations within our communities. So, you know, there is certainly a drive to prepare as much as possible and also reduce their impact as much as possible. So we, like 4 years ago when I started, we wanted to really try and create a service within our organization that could help sort of meet all municipalities where they were at and try and help support any amount of climate action planning that they wanted to do. You know, Portland and South Portland were really great leaders in the region. They created One Climate Future, which is a shared climate action plan. And our goal was to really build off of that and the work that the state was doing with the state climate action plan to help bring along our smaller communities into doing climate action planning and starting to implement some of the actions. A lot of our communities were very interested. So these are climate action plans that we currently have either in development or that have been completed. Falmouth, Yarmouth, and Freeport are completed. Brunswick, North Yarmouth, and Cape Elizabeth are pretty close, and then the other three, Portland, South Portland, and Cumberland, have completed ones. So there's a lot of interest in the region, and a lot of our communities that don't, or maybe not ready for full climate action plans or don't have them, are interested in doing some amount of, you know, it might be energy planning or definitely vulnerability assessments is a big interest right now to try and get a comprehensive view of where their risk lies. So we do a lot of that work as well. I'm just going to dive in a little bit to the details of our climate action planning process to sort of help people understand what that means. It's both data focused and also engagement focused. So we try and build sort of two baseline understandings of existing conditions in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So we do an emissions inventory for all of our communities using an inventory modeling tool, and that's focused on the emissions that are created within the boundary of the community. So looking at different sources of emissions. So I'll go into that a little bit more. Then we do a vulnerability assessment, and then we go through an action planning process where we start to identify some of the actions that they want to take based on the kind of baseline input that we've got. We do significant community engagement throughout in order to make sure that the plan is really owned by the community. You know, these are not kind of carbon copies of each other in that sense. Like, they're really meant to reflect the values of each community and the ways in which they'd like to plan for the future. So we really want to make sure that there's a lot of ownership within the community. And then moving into implementation, you know, the other piece of this is making sure that these are not just plans that sit on the shelf. I think both the state and Portland and South Portland have done a great job identifying ways in which you can really make implementation of climate action plans transparent, so people can see, can track progress and understand, you know, the ways in which they're, you know, proceeding through the plan and making sure that they're achieving some of the goals. So we would like it for our municipalities to do the same. So a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, these are just some examples of results from our inventory work. You know, the inventories are meant to, like I said, measure the sources of emissions within a town boundary. It identifies kind of the predominant sectors and the contributions that those make regarding emissions. Most of our towns, but not all, are really dominated by transportation emissions, but some of our towns, especially the denser towns or smaller, you know, boundary-wise, buildings are really the driving factor in emissions, and that's usually from heating within residential or commercial buildings. So once we have the community emissions profile, we help communities think through whether they'd like to set emissions reduction targets. A lot of our communities have, but not all of them. And these emission reduction targets are sort of either in line with what the state has identified as the state emission reduction target, but or they can be more aggressive. And usually some of our communities like Falmouth and Yarmouth and Freeport have set emission reduction targets that are actually in line with the Paris Climate Agreement and those commitments. And so they're actually a little more aggressive in terms of the speed and the percentage of emission reductions. So communities can decide to do that or decide not to set emission reduction targets. Some of our smaller communities will likely not set emission reduction targets because then it can be really hard to kind of track over time when you have a really limited capacity within your municipal government. So again, this is meant to kind of reflect the values of the community. This emission reduction target does sort of help set the stage for what actions are going to be considered in the plan. So the next baseline piece of it that we do is assessing climate vulnerabilities. We map climate hazards, and that's usually using state level data, and map existing conditions. So understanding like conserved lands or where habitat is located within a community. Obviously the roads and infrastructure piece of it is useful to map. And then we overlay climate hazards on top of that and start to understand where there might be flooding or issues that may be impacting habitat or infrastructure. And then we also do a lot of research on demographics, understanding existing social vulnerabilities that could heighten risk. And we do a lot of sort of interviewing and data collection with municipal governments, with town staff, with community-based organizations. Libraries are great sources of understanding communities. So just trying to get really an understanding of what are the existing conditions within a community, what are the existing vulnerabilities that make certain groups more at risk for climate hazards. And all of that we put together in a report that's kind of an appendix to the climate action plan. So from there, we use those two baseline pieces of data and knowledge to start to build the climate action strategies. And these are usually focused, like I said, around sectors. So homes and buildings, commercial buildings, transportation, looking at the natural environment and habitat, energy, waste, and then sort of public health. And resilience is usually built into all of these pieces, or we might have like a more resilience focused section. It just depends on the community. Here are some examples of strategies. So these are really pulled from best practices across the country of what cities and towns are looking at for climate actions. But it's also really focused on sort of what's working here in Maine and what's working both at the state level and within communities that are kind of leaders in this area. And it's really focused on what the municipality can control and the municipal government can control, which is really quite a lot here in Maine, being a home rule state. But it's also focused on, to some extent, on how the municipality can encourage residents to get involved, and any actions that could be like taken up by volunteer committees, we usually include those as well. So we sort of set high level strategies and then go into more detail. And a lot of times we divide these up by kind of like quick wins or high impact ones that we think communities want to work on right away. And we try and help them understand like what level of impact around emissions this would have, and how it might serve any target that they've set. So if there's a 2030 or a 2050 target for emissions, there are some actions that are absolutely going to be required to meet the 2030 or 2050 emissions targets. We try and highlight that as well, like adopting electric vehicles. So our modeling tools sort of help identify like the percentage of electric vehicles they would need to have adopted by 2030 or 2050 in order to meet those targets. So we try and provide that data as well. As you can see, this is really detailed, and it is really meant to sort of make sure that there is an implementation plan in place. This is not always sort of digestible, I think, by the general public, but it's a good way to see just what are the direction that these communities are moving in, and what are the types of actions they might see in their community as the climate action plans start to be implemented. So to talk about implementation, for our towns that have finished their climate action plans or moving into implementation, there's a lot of great support out there, especially right now. There is a significant state funding as well as federal funding for implementation of all different kinds. So I'll focus a little bit on some of the state funding and just some examples of what our communities have been doing to implement actual actions instead of just on the planning side. So the Community Resilience Partnership is a state-run funding source that has really been instrumental, I think, in moving towns towards climate action. Even towns that have not done climate action plans can apply, enroll in the program, and apply up to $50,000 per community and per grant cycle. And there's been 1 or 2 grant cycles every year. So you can see sort of the broad uptake of communities across the state that have applied for this funding. There's no match, so it's really easy to access the funding and just get started. We can talk about some of the examples that we've seen across the state and in our region. So a lot of our communities really start to target ordinances as one of the first sort of areas to start working on. Ordinances can be a bit boring, but they have a huge impact on sort of the future and shape of our communities. So looking at EV charging ordinances that may require EV-ready parking spots in future developments, looking at building codes, for example, adopting stretch building codes that require more efficient buildings to be built for new buildings. Shoreline zoning, looking at resilience ordinances. The City of Portland's doing a resilience overlay zone to look at kind of a zoning overlay in areas that are particularly at risk for flooding. And so these are just sort of some examples. Obviously, solar ordinances. This is an area that's really easy for our communities to dive into, but does take, making sure that you have, I think climate action plans are really good for pointing in the direction and like having an argument to say, like, this is where we said we wanted to go. We need an EV charging ordinance in order to get there to make sure that we increase EV adoption in our towns. And so, when you're starting to do the hard work of getting these ordinances developed and accepted within communities, I think the climate action plans do a really good job of reminding everybody why they're doing this. So this is a big focus for our communities as well. A lot of communities also focus on sort of more specific planning or project related work that they wanted to do. A lot of times sort of planning studies for more specific infrastructure are needed. So there's an example here of the town landing in Falmouth. They did a very specific resilience study for the town landing, which floods frequently. And as a result, they are looking for funding, and I think just applied for a couple of federal grants to actually raise up the parking area in the town landing. So these are some of the things that come out of climate action planning processes. Open space plans is an example of Bridgeton's open space plan, which again, Bridgeton doesn't have a climate action plan, but what they've identified through a process of enrolling in the Community Resilience Partnership is that their community was obviously, very committed to maintaining open space in Bridgeton, and so they applied to get funding to develop an open space plan, which really helps to target their growth and development as well. A lot of communities are doing energy efficient lighting projects in their own municipal buildings, or upgrading, getting heat pumps or upgrading heating and cooling and ventilation systems. And I think this is really helpful because it helps show the community as the municipalities as leaders, and kind of can help show some of this technology to the communities, and also reduces costs in a lot of these building operations, which is great for municipalities. And then purchasing electric fleet vehicles is another area that we see kind of a quick win that communities are focused on. So if John is still here, I'm going to have him talk. Oops.
Yeah.
A little bit. Sorry, let me change the slide. Whoops. See that? Oh, okay, there we go.
All right, hi everybody. My name is John Gagne. I'm the Sustainability Program Coordinator at the Greater Portland Council of Governments, and also the co-director of the Maine Clean Communities Program, which is a program that we host through the Greater Portland Council of Governments. And really, it's a National Department of Energy partnership that we've hosted at the Greater Portland Council of Governments for over 25 years now. And really, our mission is working to expand the use of alternative fuels, domestically produced transportation fuels, and energy efficient vehicle technologies. So there are over 75 Clean Cities coalitions across the country that are working with local partners and stakeholders, both in the public and private sector, to help strategize and implement transportation decarbonization actions. So, as Sarah had mentioned before, and Jeff before that, transportation is a huge piece of the pie for greenhouse gas emissions, and it's really a key area that we should be targeting to quickly and rapidly reduce our overall greenhouse gas emissions. So really what this program is focused on is providing education, outreach, and technical assistance to both public and private sector fleets. We do a lot of work with Vermont and New Hampshire as well to sort of help showcase these technologies and the implementation feasibility. We live in a very cold and hilly climate, so it makes sense that we're working together and creating sort of these regional and statewide partnerships with surrounding partners to really help bring these fuels and technologies to our states. And through this program, it's a really great avenue for doing these technology implementation strategies, demonstrations. We do a lot of ride and drive events, webinars. Really a great resource for learning about anything alternative fuels. If any of you have fleets that would like to explore any of these alternative fuel options, or really electric vehicles is a big portfolio of our work. We're happy to talk through that process. Workshop some ideas. Recently, there's been an uptick in biofuels and renewable diesel. So, we work across all of those sort of alternative fuels, and happy to do more. But wanted to at least highlight some of the programs that we're working on here through our Maine Clean Communities program, and that's the Drive Electric Maine program, where we convene stakeholders, both members of the general public and business and public sector stakeholders around electric vehicle adoption, and sort of showcasing, highlighting incentives and technologies that are sort of emerging at the national level, and how we can bring those to the state. And I just want to talk a little bit about one of our other workplace charging programs called Empower. So really what this is doing is it's a really exciting opportunity for workplaces to get free technical assistance for installing charging at the workplace, to offer primarily for employees. So through this program, we can sign a pledge for the workplace, and I'll drop those links in the chat after this, but it's a great opportunity for the workplace to receive sort of one-on-one technical assistance. We have a lot of resources. This is also a national partnership, so we can tap into a wide network of folks that are doing this work across the country, and also connect folks with workplaces across the state of Maine that have already been sort of a leader in this space, and help shepherd that process. We have connections with utilities, so we can help coordinate utilities. We can help map out demand charging. We have access and are closely following incentives for charging infrastructure, which is a top priority for most folks. We've got resources to help walk through the sort of step-by-step process that a workplace needs to go through. And of course, a big piece of it is sort of receiving this local and national recognition for being a leader in the space. So this is a program that is available to all workplaces in the state of Maine at no cost to you. So I'll drop the pledge in there, and essentially all you have to do is sign the pledge as a workplace and select Maine Clean Communities at the bottom, and we'll be in touch and we can sort of start that conversation and help work you through that.
Thanks, John. So I think that's all the slides we had, but happy to hand it back over to answer any questions.
Thank you so very much, both of you, all three of you. I think one of my first questions is how are these changes in terms of climate and sustainability having an influence on municipal budgets? So like I looked up the Portland budget, 52% of their money goes to education, 17% goes to public safety, 15% is debt, leaving essentially 15% for everything else, including public works. Do you see municipalities shifting their budget priorities as a result of climate and sustainability planning?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think I'll take it in two parts. So in terms of the impacts of climate change and climate hazards, a lot of the storms that we saw and the cleanup and that kind of thing has to be the funding for it is sometimes made fronted by municipalities, but a lot of it's coming from the state and FEMA and reimbursements. So at least hopefully, there is somewhat of a minimal impact, although all of the cleanup in response to these storms absorbed so much time of municipal staff and energy, when they could be working on other things. So I think that's important to look at. I think we have seen, especially in our communities that are really leaders, that they have shifted, funding to start to support some of these climate actions that they're interested in achieving. I think right now we're in a funding environment where there's so much federal and state incentives that municipalities, haven't really been bearing the full, I think, brunt of the cost of climate actions on their municipal budgets because there is so much incentives and grant money right now, which is, I think, a really good time to be getting organized, to having been doing the climate planning that can lead you to understanding what your priorities are and starting to apply for this funding, because it's a lot easier to get grant funding to support climate actions than to put it in the municipal budget. I do think that a lot of municipalities are starting to see, especially for actions that have really good ROI or reduce costs for municipal operations. I think communities are really happy to front that money, to invest in new technology or new or especially to build solar fields or that kind of thing that can really help reduce operation costs in the future. So we're seeing that there's a strong interest in investments like that. I think the third piece on just to mention on municipal budgets, as we're seeing climate hazards impact municipalities more and more, and more homes are being impacted by storms, I think we will start to see that there is an impact on municipal tax collecting, because as people's property values may decrease because of impacts from storms, municipalities will see that decrease in their tax collection. So I think it's not something that we're seeing quite yet, but it definitely is happening, especially in some of the southern communities that have been hit really hard from flooding, or even communities along rivers that had a lot of river flooding. So it's something that certainly could happen as people start to kind of internalize the cost of flooding on reducing property values.
Great, thank you. I'm going to follow up on a question that Richie Ainsworth put in the chat box, which is in terms of developing climate action plans for towns, or expanding it also to Jeff and his work with the business world. How often do we need to essentially start from scratch and rebuild something from brand new, as opposed to using somebody else's template to modify it slightly, and so we don't have to always start from scratch.
Yeah, please don't start from scratch. There's so many great resources. I will say we have not gotten to the point where we've like uploaded templates or stuff to be freely available, but please reach out to me. We certainly have a lot of stuff. I will say one of the best things to do is just look at existing climate action plans, like looking at One Climate Future. Falmouth's climate action plan is on their website. You can really just sort of see from that standpoint. All of them sort of detail the community engagement that they did. So learning from what others have done is great. There are definitely resources. The C40, the Cities Network, has some really great resources for climate action planning. They have like a climate action planning framework and like a step-by-step. So there's definitely things out there, and happy to follow up with some links if that would be useful. But yeah, this is really, no two plans are alike each other, but the processes are quite similar that people follow. So definitely don't recreate things that you don't need to.
Jeff, you're nodding. Do you want to add anything else?
Sustainability Council that I mentioned earlier that we hope to launch sometime soon. In fact, we'll have an event at our summit in May that starts to talk about how companies can learn from each other, both on some of the broader issues, like when you have different types, different sizes of companies in the room, as well as industry specific things that companies can start to do to build their climate action and sustainability plan. So that will, and like Sarah said, we'll be taking advantage of the expertise of the other companies that are involved, but there are a lot of templates out there, and there are companies out there that are helping other companies do what they need to do to save energy, reduce their energy use, and save some money in the process. There's a company that we work with called Sustain that has been helping companies in rural and farming communities throughout the state access and put together grant applications that they can then use to apply through the Department of Agriculture to do renewable energy projects at their facility. There's another rather new company called Amplify Energy that helps companies with their energy use by taking a look at their utility bills and others, and making recommendations on how they can save money in incorporating different technologies and systems into their homes or into their buildings in some way. So there's a lot of templates, different experts out there. Anytime you can get in a room and learn from somebody else that is already doing something and using that as a case study or a model, it's always better than starting from scratch.
Yeah, and I'd expand that template concept to be not only a template for making the plan, but there's also the template for asking for money to pay for the plan, where again, a municipality is going to a state or federal entity asking for $1 million, and they may not need to start from scratch in terms of putting together their budget proposal and their grant proposal. Others have put together similar grant proposals and requests for funding, and sometimes those can also be easy templates. In thinking about the grants and federal and state funds, how are those funds typically spent? Again, sometimes they're hiring members of E2Tech to do work, but sometimes it's also paying for staff salaries at the municipal level.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the grant. I think FEMA, when they do reimbursements, that does cover staff hours potentially, but other state grants or federal grants don't necessarily. So it really just depends on where the money is coming from. But yeah, it definitely takes, one of the biggest barriers that we see to climate action is really the capacity of staff to both apply for and then manage grant funding, which can be, I manage a lot of federal grants and it is incredibly time consuming. So, as a regional planning organization, we do try and be that regional source to help provide additional capacity for our community. So we oftentimes will apply for federal grants that then, money will flow to our communities and we'll manage the grants, but it's incredibly time consuming. And that is, a lot of municipalities don't necessarily have sustainability coordinators. We're lucky we have a lot in our region, but most municipalities really don't. They may have a town manager and a couple staff. So to manage a big federal grant is really a lot to ask for smaller municipalities.
Yeah. When a town only has 5,000 people, it's hard to
Yeah,
spend $50,000 on a staff person to do it.
Yeah, and the state has done a good job with their funding grants, with the Community Resilience Partnership or Coastal Community Grants or some of their other grants. They have pretty low barriers to apply and to manage. The reporting requirements are pretty low. So that's great. I think those are really good grants for municipalities to get because they're easier. But the federal grants can be really just sort of over the top burdensome.
Not that I want to ask you to pick, you or John to pick favorites, but you did mention Falmouth, and Falmouth is represented here today. Are there another 5 or 6 communities when you think of communities that have been successful that are interesting models to follow
Yeah.
in the last couple of years?
Yeah, no, I definitely can't pick favorites. I mean, it's just fascinating to see. I think what I've been really encouraged by is just to see how each community really approaches it in their own way and sort of driving with their own values. So if, even in communities, like I said, Bridgeton, where I think, there's maybe some interest in doing climate action plans, but it's not necessarily like the easiest thing, both politically and capacity wise, to develop a full climate action plan. So just, I really respect some of the smaller communities that are coming to this and just identifying like the values that their community is interested in and pursuing those, and while aligned with the state climate action plan and trying to achieve like a more sustainable future. It doesn't have to look like what Portland and South Portland did, which is incredibly impressive, and they're like really leaders in the region, and we're so grateful for the work that they do, but it's really not feasible for all other communities. So yeah, we're really excited. I think what we see in the difference, our rural and smaller communities, like I said, may pick one particular topic or one area of sustainability they really want to focus on. We just completed an energy plan for the town of Windham that really focuses in on the operations and costs and energy efficiency within their municipal operations. So they were really interested in doing that. And we also did a community-wide emissions inventory as part of that work. So that's sort of how we approach it, is just wanting to kind of meet communities where they're at and focus on the things that they care most about. But yeah, Falmouth was the first of our smaller communities in our region to do a climate action plan, and it's been really exciting to see the acceptance of the community and just their ability to like really hit the ground running and start to implement some of those actions.
I know GPCOG's been very active in this area. How about the other regional development and planning agencies?
Yeah, Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission, which is our friends to the south, they have some great resources. Actually, I can put a link to those as well. They created a greenhouse gas emissions inventory methodology for communities for the state of Maine, and we follow their methodology as well. So they have a great resource on their website, which is helps municipalities like do a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And they have multiple communities in their region going through climate action plans together as a cohort, and they've been producing, I think, a lot of materials that could be useful for others. So definitely in Southern Maine. I know in Midcoast, the Midcoast COG that just has been reconstituted the last couple of years, they have a lot of interest in the Midcoast area around climate action planning, and are, again, doing some EV work. And so, yeah, it's really happening all over the state. The Community Resilience Partnership has been a great motivator, and through that, there's been funding for regional coordinating work. So we're part of a regional coordinating collaborative that focuses in Southern Maine, but there's a regional coordinator really in every area of the state to help communities get enrolled in the Community Resilience Partnership. So that has helped really bring a lot of communities, anywhere from like all over the place, Millbridge, like name a place down east or northern Maine, that have been getting enrolled in the partnership and just, getting grants to do work that is aligned with the state climate action plan. So it's not just us, for sure.
Yeah. I was just up in Presque Isle a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And they were having an all-day housing conference to think
Right.
about housing as an issue for northern Maine
Right.
in terms of bringing up more people to that part of the state to boost the economy there, but also the whole question about repairing older houses and the transportation questions that arise about you have rural development. We're coming to the end of our hour, and I would like to invite the people who are with us, if they would like to stay on and simply have a conversation. We can do that as opposed to just having conversations back and forth with the speakers. And Orion, you've got your hand up. Do you want to turn on your